Joe?
Great,
There you go.
okay, so,
Hey, success, thank you, Joe.
so 3 out of the 5 committee members are present, and 1 is on Zoom, so I declare that a quorum is present. I understand that the Assistant Mayor will be joining us soon. I would next ask for a motion for the approval of the minutes of the December 13, 2021 meeting, which were distributed electronically before today. Did anybody have a chance to review them?
I did not, sorry.
Okay. How about you, review them?
Yep,
Would you care to make a motion?
yep, I made a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay. This is, right now we get the December.
Oh,
13th.
oh, okay, from the December 13th meeting.
Okay, all right. Would you care to second that?
I'll second.
Okay. Any corrections, additions, deletions? Hearing none, I'll call the question. We have to do this by roll call because we have someone on Zoom, so we'll start with you, Beth.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Certainly. How do you vote, Genevieve, yes or no?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
And the chair votes yes. And I'd ask for a similar motion to approve the minutes of the April 5th, 2022 meeting.
Okay, I make a motion to
Excuse me?
approve the April 5th minutes.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, any changes, corrections, additions, deletions to those minutes? Hearing none, I'll call that question. Robin?
Yep, yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Genevieve?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Okay, now we'll get into the rest of the meeting. When we were here on April 5th, the primary purpose was to approve a letter to be issued by this committee in support of the grant application. As you know, we actually submitted 2 grant applications, one to the State of New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services and the other to Senator Shaheen's office as part of the federal budget. We have not heard from Senator, no decision has been made one way or another with respect to the federal application, but we did receive word that our request for funding from the state has been rejected. We have a very nice letter indicating that our project is a great idea, or will do what, hopefully it will do what we believe it would accomplish, but they had too many applications to be able to afford us.
Do you know what got funded?
I don't know
Is that gonna
that.
be released at some point? It'd be nice to know what did get funded.
Yeah, not aware.
I have not heard either, so I will update the committee if I do hear.
Okay, great, thanks.
At some point, that will probably be posted, but if anybody would like a copy of the letter from the state, I'm happy to send that after the meeting. Okay, all right, so now, this brings us to the real thrust of today's meeting, which has to do with how we go forward in light of the fact that we don't have that grant funding, and in light of the permitting obstacles that we face and timing issues that we're already sitting here the first week of June. And so I'm gonna allow Cassie to take the mic and lead us to where we are as of today. Before I do that, let me just have everybody in the room identify themselves for the record, anybody watching this later on. Why don't you tell us who you are, Ted?
Sure. My name is Ted Talukian. I'm the founder of Talukian, and I'm an architect and urban designer.
Hi, I'm Carlos Guzman. I'm an architect at Talukin.
Stephanie?
Stephanie Secord, Public Information Officer for the city.
And Kathy?
Cassie Bethany, landscape architect and project manager from Weston and Sampson.
Thank you. I apologize for not doing that at the beginning. Go ahead, Cassie.
Can we?
Oh, sorry.
Quite all right, quite all right.
Chopped liver.
Joe Almeida, Facilities Manager, City of Portsmouth.
Peter Rice, Director of Public Works,
I see you guys so often, I feel
Yeah.
like I'm in the same house.
which is background noise. I get it.
Okay, now, Cassie, why don't you lead us and the materials that were handed out at the beginning of the meeting.
I'll share screen in a moment, but I just wanted to give either Peter or Joe an opportunity to say a few words before we presented the slides.
Thanks.
If you'd like. If you'd like.
There's been a lot of activity associated with this project, trying to, refine the phase one and getting it moved forward. And unfortunately, there's been a number of items that have caused us to have to step back and revisit what is part of phase one. It's driven a lot by costs. The escalating costs are really making it more difficult. Some of it is regulatory in nature in terms of the duration to get permitting, and some of it too is as we do work, we become more informed, and certain things become apparent in terms of sequence of construction and types of things, and it makes us step back and say, okay, we thought we were going to include this in this first stab at it, but then we realized that there are pieces that need to be done first or in a sequence so that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot from a stranded costs or difficulty having to rework areas that we've already done. So what we're showing today is an attempt to keep the ball moving forward within the budget that we have available, and to have it in a manner that doesn't preclude doing better things as we move forward, and and to minimize the potential stranded costs. So Cassie will, Joe, do you want to add anything to that?
Very well said, very well said. I would just simply repeat the same thing that you said, so that's very accurate, thank you.
And by stranded costs, you mean costs that would be incurred through temporary work, but would it be able to be recouped in the long run?
It depends on, so if you're talking about design effort, there's aspects of design that are reusable. If we're talking about construction, there are things during construction, if we make decisions now, may not be recoverable. So the challenge is to decide, is it worth, for example, if we're moving the Shaw Building, do we make it, and without doing the addition, do we make it functional so people can move in? That would require plumbing, that would require heating, other things to bring it up to certain level of acceptance from a code standpoint. And if we were adding our addition afterwards, as you recall, the addition was going to house a lot of the infrastructure to support the Shaw Building. So the investment in the Shaw Building to make it function on a temporary basis would be lost. It would not be what we, at this point, would consider a good use of funds. That's not to say, as we go forward and explore what it means to have a building mothballed for a duration, it might be something that the city says, from a process standpoint, from a programming standpoint, it might be worth that marginal investment, even if it's a 5-year investment, until we have monies available to do the next step. So that's part of the process we're going through right now, and it's a very complex project for a number of reasons. At first blush, you would think, oh, it's pretty straightforward. You just, move a building, bring it up, put utilities in the ground. But there are 5 parcels making up Prescott Park, and that makes it 5 times the permitting. And you can't, and I'm probably speaking to what you're going to speak to, but we reached out to the DES saying, hey, this is ridiculous. It's treated as one parcel. Can't we treat it as one parcel? And they said, no, you can't. The law says they have to be 5 separate permits. So that becomes a challenge.
Can we merge the park?
Well, that
Yes,
is something that's of consideration, but that's going to take time because of all the overlapping restrictions on the properties and how to unify that. So that is something that we're planning on pursuing, or at least exploring. What would it entail? What would that entail? I envision it's going to take a couple years and a lot of frustration from lawyers. But I'm not a lawyer. To me, it's just like, yeah, just make it happen. Come on. As lawyers often say to me, what do you mean? Put a pipe in the ground. It's not a big deal.
Are these city or state regulations or a combination of both?
They're state regulations.
Okay.
Yeah, state law. So, but that's an expanded. We're encroaching into a lot of things. Let's go through the presentation, and there'll be a great opportunity to have some dialogue. The intent that I wanted, and I felt was really important, and I'm glad Tom was willing to pull the meeting together was really, we've gotten to the point where we need to really understand where we're going. There's a lot of stuff that Cassie and her team have brought forward, and it's like, okay, well, this is really important stuff. We should have an opportunity to talk about it. And just so everybody understands, why is it, why are we going at what seems to be a snail's pace at times? So I wanted to, that was my hope for today, was just to, make sure everybody's up to speed, and, we hopefully can make informed recommendations and decisions. So,
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, and I thought it would be helpful for folks who don't understand what stranded costs mean to clarify that, so I appreciate the expansion on that thought.
and it's my interpretation of standard costs. I think the legal definition probably is a little different, but, because false work is also something they talk about, but I consider it stranded costs.
Okay, so we'll go through the slides that are on the screen and also in your hands at a high level, and then we can get into the weeds of discussion as we open it up for conversation. So we'll go through what a scope would look like for a tighter Phase 1A scope. We'll walk through what that schedule means. I'll start off, I'll pass it to Ted to talk about the Shaw specifically and the relocation, and then he'll kick it back to me to work through schedule. And if I can switch to the slide, I will do that. Having a moment here. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing for just a moment and just open it up in a different way. I apologize.
No pressure.
It's okay.
We're all just waiting on it.
How many years have we been using Zoom?
Oh, I know, it's,
Just kidding.
It's just,
this will
on
work.
Cassie's defense, she usually uses Teams, so different program.
Thanks, Peter. All right, we're there. Okay. There we go. Oh, boy. Sorry.
Cassie, I think you have, if you double click on the image, I've had this problem on Zoom.
No,
I've
it's
been
not,
trained to
it's
use
not
it.
Zoom, it's Bluebeam, unfortunately. All
Do you
right.
have it on a stick? I could put it
Yeah,
on.
I've got it. I should have it now. Apologies. All right. There we go.
Yay.
Yay.
Thank you. Thanks for bearing with me. All right, so we all have seen this graphic for a long time now. This graphic was generated when we were in the implementation phase of the project, where we took a hard look at resiliency and what was the combination of strategies that we were going to put together to make this park more resilient, not only for the park itself, but for the neighborhood. We came up with an approach that incorporated 5 or 6 different strategies working in combination to come up with this larger approach. We then moved into a phasing strategy that really became a resilient first, park first, but resilient first approach. And the Phase 1 scope was around really the core of the park and incorporating as much of the resiliency strategies as we could. The temporary stormwater holding area, the preferential flood pathway through Water Street, this raising of the seawall, adding tide gates, and importantly, the lifting and relocating of the Shaw to a higher elevation to pull that historic maritime architecture out of harm's way, and among a few other things as well. So now we come to an updated master plan. We presented this back to City Council. It was approved, and we've got the Phase 1 area outlined. That area was fairly loose finite but loose as we ended the implementation phase. And now we're midway through documentation. We're at about a 60% level. We've refined and refined and refined exactly how the Phase 1 area sits within the park today, but also how it would then lend itself to future improvements. And just dialing in a little closer, so the Phase 1 area is dashed now in yellow, and we're looking at tightening that even further to focus really in on the Water Street, raising of the Water Street, adding in all that stormwater infrastructure, and lifting and relocating the Shaw, really at a high level. That's what we're hoping to achieve in Phase 1A. Peter alluded to it earlier. We're doing that for a myriad of reasons. We've looked at the timelines associated with permitting, the number of lots that we're touching through these improvements, the financing around the entire Phase 1 scope, and how to get to a project that can be put out as quickly as possible within the budget that the city has currently. And Ted will go into more detail around the options that were weighed around the Shaw and the studies that we've done since we last met. So with that, I'll go into just a little bit more detail about what exactly we're looking at for a truncated Phase 1A scope for the moment. And before I do that, I just said too, we were, one of the silver linings of this reduced scope is that we can really preserve the Prescott Park Arts Festival stage area during this season without impacting it. That was always kind of a question of what are we doing with the Arts Festival during construction, before construction, after construction, how many times would the stage have to move? So if we focus on the Water Street area, we can really keep them where they are and then move them once. So just, as an added benefit and something to consider as you evaluate this approach. So in terms of demolition, we would first demolish the garage and the lean-to under this scope, and then we would lift and move the Shaw. And as I said, Ted will get into that a little bit more. We will also strip the asphalt on Water Street fully, all the way up to the Sheaf building. We will trench and install all of our utilities. So we'll bring all of the lines that we need to the new Shaw location: gas, sewer, water, plumbing, and electrical. And we'll also lay the stormwater lines as well all the way out to the Piscataqua. So we'll make that fully operational. We'll install the tide gate there as well, and then we'll outlet to the river. So once we are done with this work, that whole system will be in place and we won't have to go back and touch it. And then moving into what the new work will look like, what you're looking at here is a markup of our 60% drawing, so it is a little technical. But all is to say is that we have been working through the full scope, and now we're reducing it, and we're trying to see what fits in with existing versus future. In the new work would include the new pavement for Water Street, new parking area, the Shaw in its final destination. We will also do the connection up to the Sheaf at its elevation, the preferred elevation, and we will be raising Water Street to its final location. So when you imagine Liberty Lawn at a higher elevation than Water Street is currently, everything will be in the same plane at Water Street as is Liberty Lawn right now. And then from there, really behind the Shaw, moving towards the stage, that's when the grades will start to drop off, the landscape will start to drop, and we'll get down to existing elevation. Really between the line of the Shaw, if you're looking at the Piscataqua, over towards the stage. And it'll be, I would say, fairly gradual. We have a lot of room there, so we can have a nice gentle slope that connects back down into that open lawn area. I think that's more or less covers this scope. And the hope is really, we're doing this once, we're doing all this work, we're not coming back to redo, or there really is minimal sunk cost within this scope. So we feel confident that we would be able to focus on this area, get it all set, not impact the Arts Festival's operations during season, and then they'll be able to move back next, and then we'll continue on with the next Phase 1B area of work.
And we're hoping for phase 1A to be hopefully done in 2022? Or are we shooting for 2023 or 2024?
I'll go through that after. That'll be the last thing that we touch on, but that's like the perennial question and very important. So I'll put in a pin in that for a moment. So I'll just pass it to Ted to go through a few things related to the Shaw itself.
It's great. And so Cassie, you can actually click the slides for
Yep,
me, correct?
just tell me when.
Yeah, I think through all these conversations, I think Peter touched on it, about the project and starting with a smaller Phase 1A scope. I think the vision remains the same over time, and that's important to point out. So we like to start with this slide about the Shaw Building goals, which I think you've seen in previous meetings, and not to go through that, but it's just important to maintain that the vision is intact, and that we're really looking to, in Phase 1, to do three things with the Shaw building itself. One is to demolish the lean-to in the garage, to relocate the Shaw building, really around the resiliency measures that Cassie had pointed out earlier, and that's really an element of preservation as such. And then due to budget constraints, and also in a way to step into the future work in a logical sequence that Peter had pointed out, looking to mothball the building. And mothballing is a phrase that is worked on through the U.S. Department of Interior standards here that we'll walk through and just tell you how that we're going to preserve the building in the short term so that we can step into a more developed renovation long term. And to go back to the vision, this is a slide that we had showed you previously, in which is, in order to get to that initial Phase 1, we wanted to sort of vet out some of the phases. And really, over time, you're looking at the Phase 1A, which is the Shaw building moved closer to Marcy Street. Then the longer-term future phase is looking at the addition and relocation of the temporary stage, as you see closer to the sheaf. So the existing conditions here, and the reason why we're showing you this is just to sort of be able to articulate that process that we're looking through 1A. Next. We're really maintaining the Shaw building, which you see outlined in those existing drawings, and the other drawings that you see to the right of the bottom, where the lean-to in the garage will be removed and demolished. And this is a diagram that really just shows the outline, which is shown dashed, of where the existing location of the structures are, and then the new location of the Shaw, as pointed out, which is closer to Marcy Street. And part of that process where we look to go through that relocation, we'll be looking at the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation and flood adaptation, using those guidelines as the standards for the relocation. And then mothballing will be done under the guidance of the National Park Service Preservation Brief, which has that really articulates the mothballing process for historic buildings.
How many feet are we moving the building?
About 100 and
I just can't remember that.
It's about 2.5 yards. No, it's about a Shaw and a half
yeah.
Okay.
dimension. So I would say it's about 70, 80 feet.
Yeah.
And if people ask, if the community asks, we're not just moving it to move it, it's because of all the climate mitigation.
Well, that's
And-
two-part. That's a great question. So what does moving do for the Shaw, and what does it do for the park? There's two aspects to that. One of it is certainly from a flood point of view, we're going to raise it and relocate it in a higher ground location, and we're raising about 3.5+ feet, and that will do a lot for preservation over time, and we believe that's really necessary for the long-term viability of the building over time. And the second part of the moving is, if we can just go back to the studies, and back really to one more, please. To part of the master plan revised drawings, is by doing this and relocating it, we did a lot of, if you may recall, studies working with PPAF and the Arts Festival, working with the city to develop a program for a new construction addition that could eliminate and minimize trailers on the site and also a lot of the supporting elements, and also have dual uses that could be used for city functions. And then by doing that as well, we can relocate the stage as a temporary stage, meeting the master plan guidelines, to a location that really frees up the lawn and allows the park to really be a park-first approach. So that's probably the two parts. And back to this slide here. So part of I thought it'd be a good idea to explain what goes into mothballing the building. There's a set of standards. This is a checklist that we can sort of walk you through. But in general, we document the building. We look at ways of stabilizing the building structural elements. We develop a pest control system that protects the building for the duration of the mothball period. And this is really seen as a temporary phase. And then we look at securing the envelope, protecting the windows, protecting the roof as needed, developing security and vandalism measures for the building, and also putting temporary heat into the building and ventilation so it's preserved over time. And really, a part of that is also developing a maintenance program that monitors this over time. I don't know if Carlos, you want to add to that?
No, I think that covers it all. The important thing is to keep it intact.
Yeah.
Do not allow for any decay of the structural elements, as well as protecting against fire and vandalism and pests above everything. So.
But important also to note, it's not going to be occupied. It will just be temporary, secured for a short period of time.
And when you say short period of time, are we thinking, short period means different things to different people? Are we thinking 6 months, a year?
It really comes to.
People are going to be asking these kinds of questions.
So it comes down to available funds. The budget, which I'm not sure Cassie has an updated budget, but we know the costs are significantly greater than the available funds. We know there's a lot of other priorities from funding standpoint for the city. So the idea is it's going to take a while, and I would not hazard a guess. I wouldn't want to hazard a guess on how long it would take.
Can we do any fundraising, or does it have to be like city set-aside money?
No, I think that's a really good question, and actually, Tom had brought that up, and I think it's something that should be discussed frankly, to me, it really seems like a great opportunity for somebody to have a legacy project that would benefit the community. So I think it's that's something that needs to be talked about. That wasn't the thought of today's meeting.
I'm just throwing that out there because we're getting all this information about longer-term project and high costs, so.
Yeah, I think it was always envisioned that there would be some fundraising once we got going on this. One of the concerns was having a clear, tangible project that somebody felt they were investing. Putting utilities in the ground is really a hard thing to put your name on. Personally, I'm Pipe Pete, that'd be great. Peter Rice, Memorial Stormwater, that'd be awesome. But it's not something that most people would be excited about funding. So I think your point is a great point. I think it's an opportunity to start the dialogue on that. I think once we go to the city council, it probably might be one of our recommendations that we start the discussion about what it would take. But I think this first phase would really help kick that off because it would get people excited, and it would clearly define the need. So I think it's
Maybe we
probably.
put it on a future agenda that we really kind of, because I don't know if the city council is going to want like a presentation of what does fundraising look like, or we just get like carte blanche, sure, go do some fundraising.
Well, just to add to what Peter said, the original master plan envisioned that there would be a public-private partnership to build out this master plan, and as you said, there's a timing thing. In addition to, having a hard sell to convince people to support the cost of underground utilities, we're not quite there yet on what the finished product is going to look like, and so you got to be a little careful about going out and raising funds without knowing exactly.
Right,
Whether
people
we're gonna
don't want to give
analyze
money and have the
additional-
project
yeah.
be something different than.
Well, exactly. But I, and as Peter has referenced, I've discussed this recently with a couple of people. I think we're getting close to the point of kind of setting that up.
Good.
Now that we're talking about we have a vision of what that addition will look like, assuming we get the permitting, everything for it. That's the type of thing that I think lends itself to a fundraising. So what's not clear at this point is what this committee's role will be in even making a proposal on that, but I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to at least talk about it in the future. You know, whether, you know, the example I think of is the Portsmouth Public Library, which was essentially funded with lots of contributions throughout business and individual contributions throughout the community. So I envision something along those lines as a model for moving this thing forward once we know where we're really gonna go.
But I think we have to be careful, because I know from being in the library, there's naming rights and stuff, and I don't know, we probably can't do that with the park, you know?
Well,
Can't be the Peter Rice Sewer outfall or something
Yeah.
like that, you know?
We can call it that, but I can't do that.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just something to keep in
I think
mind.
there's some ability, though, somewhere along the way to have some names or plaque with people's names or something.
I think that's a good question, and we should probably get opinion from our legal department to say, you know, and obviously the Attorney General's office would weigh in as well. But I think there's probably an opportunity for naming rights on a specific, like if there was the addition. If somebody, you know, gifted or put down a couple $1 million, there's probably a way a name could be placed on that building. You know, the Prescott Park the Prescott sisters have a park named after them. I don't think it precludes the ability to name a specific building or something like that within it. But you know, that's something we should define. And prior to even getting to that point and talking about it publicly, we need council buy-in and vote to modify the master plan to kind of define this where we're going. You know, we've talked about the addition, that was not necessarily part of the modified master plan. So we need to take those steps, and that's why, you know, this is a really important meeting to better define that, and then we need, as a committee, need to go to council and explain them where we're at and see if they accept the recommendations.
Yes, it actually, there's a little more background on that, but I don't want to digress too far because I know you're going to leave us in about 15 minutes, and I want to make sure we get to have a decision on this,
But I thought that they did, the last time it went to council, they did approve the demolition of the lean-to in the garage and moving the Shaw.
They did, but what we're talking about is getting the buy-in on the addition. If we're going to do fundraising, you're going to be fundraising for a specific something. So you need that, there needs to be an acceptance more than just a vague reference
Okay.
to.
So back to you, Ted.
Yeah, no, I'll try to wrap up quickly. We can go to the next slide. So, back to sort of the steps. I just want to also point out that the sequence that is outlined here is a pretty logical sequence in terms of getting to the longer vision, and it really does step into, you know, the mothballing allows us, I should say, to step into that longer vision in a rational way. But this is really where we're going to be at the end of the mothballing phase, is the building is relocated. As Cassie pointed out, the stage stays in its current location, and the Arts Festival can remain operable after Phase 1A is completed.
The only thing, if you could, before you.
Yep.
The only thing that we discussed that could be added to this potentially is, you know, the Shaw Building is mothballed. There's the potential for additional trailers to be on site housing the Arts Festival staff, because
Right
their
here.
home is.
Can't be in the Shaw building.
Correct. So
Yeah.
we could potentially see a couple more trailers in the field there that, or right immediately behind it, because that area will be, you know, flat and available, to keep them on site.
But so it's important to realize that those are details that need to be discussed and worked out. There's, if you do something like that, you're talking about providing utilities, you know, water, sewer, electricity. You've seen these commercial trailers, they're really actually more, they're portable offices, they're more mobile homes. And we've used those in construction projects in the past. And before we even go down that road, we need to look at the alternatives. There could be an alternative to housing them in real estate elsewhere. So we're not saying this is how it's going to be solved.
Right. It's a
We're just saying we're exploring, we need to be cognizant of that. the other one thing I'd like to point out too is that even though these are shown in shade, those are not going to be included as part of this first phase, the sidewalks. That's just showing some future thing. So I don't want people to misunderstand that that it looks like we're going to install that as part of this first phase.
Any more comment on this?
No,
Ted?
I think we would just go to the
Okay.
next and we can pass it back to you. And this is just getting back to the longer-term vision and giving people a sense of that. No, we can keep moving, Cassie.
So just to wrap up, and I know, Beth, you need to head out, so I'll be quick. So we needed to wrap our minds, and you asked the question about what does this mean in terms of schedule. Right now, Peter alluded to it at the beginning, the regulatory process really will be driving this for us, and it's not an insignificant process. There is some ability to stack some of these permits that we need to get, but some of it is linear, unfortunately. So we will go to HDC fairly soon for their approval. We're anticipating a 2+ meeting process, and these are all projected. Our hope that, we're hoping that we can move through this fairly quickly, but we ultimately don't know until it's happening, but we are projecting and hoping that we can meet these dates. We will go through HDC. At that same time, we will go to the State Department of Historic Resources and start that process. There's a lot of regulations and processes that we have to go through with them, but we can do that at the same time that we're working through local historic commission meetings. And then ultimately they take the historic commission's approval and have a 30-day review period after that. So that is what is indicated in the permitting section. After we have HDC approval, we can then go to the Department of Environmental Services and go for our wetlands and shoreland permits. The shoreland is the one that triggers the multi-lot submissions. In this case, I believe we're touching 4 lots. So we do need to do multiple permits for this work. We're looking at anticipating a 75-day period for that process, but it can be longer than that. So just want to keep that in folks' minds that this is a optimistic schedule, but it is not set in stone. And then after that, because we are going to be touching the water, we are then required to go to the governor and executive council for review. Anything that sits below the high tide level becomes needs a state review and approval. So that is one piece. We already knew that we needed to go to Army Corps, so those 2 processes can happen at the same time. And so we thought, why not just go through the council and governors at the same time, because we were already going to do Army Corps. So that whole process, assuming that we can get drawings together fairly quickly for this, enough to go through permitting, could get started in August. We would, our work, Tolukian's and Weston and Sampson's work would be in lockstep with this, and really, like I said earlier, the regulations are driving this. Our work kind of behind the scenes will be in support of that effort. And then we'll wrap up our drawings, we'll go out to bid, we'll get a contract in place with a contractor, the contractor will mobilize. It's a little bit more lengthy for architecture than for site work, but ultimately we're looking at an early spring start of construction for 2023.
That also informs why we're cutting back so much on phase 1A. Because, for instance, if we wanted to start laying electrical conduit, we'd be in the area where the Arts Festival is setting up. And as it is, there's gonna be some overlap of the construction during the festival season, so.
So we will be in active construction during next summer during that arts festival, but we will be limited to the Water Street area, and so the hope is that we're not impacting that season from taking place.
I'm sure there's ways to work together.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
If there's a will, there's a way.
One question, Ted. Sometimes when you kick around the term mothball, you think you take a building, you put it up on railroad ties, and it sits there until you're ready to do something with it. But we're actually going to put it on its final slab. That's not a temporary slab or anything. And I know in the past, we've talked about that building having a sort of a basement, so it will no longer have a basement. And is this driven by these federal regulations? Is that what's informing that decision to go?
Well, a couple of things there. That's a great point that we should itemize, is that the building, let's say from the finished floor of level 1 up, would be basically mothballed. So that would be, you know, restoring to some extent, just stabilizing, protecting, all the things that I went through. But as Tom pointed out, from the finished floor down to the bottom of the foundations, we're looking at making that a long-term plan, where we actually build that to the way that we would recommend it as a part of the long-term vision. And so that it may include some of the stone foundation that you see in a more integrated manner, salvaging that material, really revitalizing some of those historic details. And so it's paired between some of the guidelines, like let's say for the Secretary of Interior standards for the guidelines on preservation, with some of the mothballing, with some of the flood adaptation guidelines together. And we're really using those as guides, and I think the state's office, DHR, Department of Historic Research, will be evaluating those things, as well as the local HDC, and really making sure that we're, you know, preserving this in a manner that steps logically over time.
Okay. Other questions?
So- How much do we have for phase 1?
4.2,
And this would be eaten up by this,
the
basically?
bulk of it will be, yes.
Yeah. Just an observation, I work for the state, I have contracts that have to go through GNC, as we call it at the state. It's a little ambitious. It takes a long time to get those things up there, and get
Okay.
them through there, so, just so you know.
Yeah, that's why it's like, it's a painful process.
And the Army Corps, you know.
Yeah.
In this schedule too, if you notice the overlap with our construction documents, we're going out to bid before we have permits in hand for some of them, which is a bit of a risk on the city's part, because
We've done it before, though.
we anticipate with all of the conversations that we've been having, because we have had several over the course of the last year with all of these agencies, that when we submit the drawings, we're getting approvals. We're not hashing things out at that time. They have been briefed, they're aware, they're very clear on what our scope is. We'll provide an additional update as we go, as we're reducing the scope. So the hope is that it's not totally out of the realm, but I agree that it will likely extend out a bit more than we anticipate here.
So just to go back to the mothball thing, the stranded cost of, you know, having to update the Shaw, and perhaps I'll have all those improvements in there. Code compliance is the bathrooms, which there are currently in there, but I think an elevator would probably have to be put in there. And once you start taking,
Joe could speak to the discussions we've had with the inspection.
Yeah, if you're speaking about an opportunity to use it in some way, or what the absolute bare minimum, once we pick it up and move it, they would consider life safety issues to be
Yeah.
paramount, and that it's not just the inspection department, it's the fire department as well. So
Yeah.
we could be looking at sprinkler systems, we could be looking at accessibility. The elevator, maybe not necessarily, depending on the occupancy load and, you know, if they're using the third floor or so forth. But there would need to be 2 forms of egress, protected stairwells that come down in the event of an emergency in the building. You trigger a lot of modern code when you touch the building.
and you disrupt the interior historic
Correct.
structure.
And if you remember, we were trying to not, and the addition was, we were trying
You're gonna
to
house
allow
all
the
that stuff
addition
in
to
it, yeah.
take all of those modern amenities so
And
that we
put
can
them
keep
in.
the Shaw Building as pure as possible. No bathrooms, I don't think we're proposing any plumbing within the Shaw in its final location.
Yeah, I mean, we were trying to move the majority of it
Right,
over.
right.
Another piece to just picking up on that is the uses, right? If we
Yeah.
change uses over time, they have also other triggers. So we went through a pretty lengthy evaluation process, not just as a group here, but also
Yeah.
with the local jurisdiction. And the costs go way up, and potentially redoing things. And it just made more sense to, I think, look at it more logically and stepping over time. But I don't know if you
Yeah.
want to add to that.
No, that's clear, that's exactly what took place.
Other
Well, I
questions?
unfortunately have to go,
I
so-
do think, however, there might be, we're talking about durations that might take a bit longer in permitting. I do hope that, I mean, we would be, the HDC has seen this project at least once, maybe twice. So rather than a 2-month period, hopefully, we could do this in one meeting.
Sure.
but-
Could we actually, before Beth leaves, is it worth taking a quick vote on,
That's,
Yeah.
if you can give us 60 seconds.
Sure.
So let me see if I can, something.
Genevieve's got her hand
And
up.
I'll let you ask any questions as well, Genevieve. But, so what I hear, the proposal for Phase 1A is that we would demolish the garage and the lean-to. We would relocate Shaw to its final location and put it on a slab with sufficient electrical, et cetera, hookups, so ultimately, it wouldn't be operable then, but we wouldn't have to do any more underground work at that point. We'll remove the pavement on Water Street, we'll install the drainage from
Marcy Street.
yes, all the way to the river, including putting in the dams. And then we'll raise Water Street and the land in the rail that will run from Shaw to Shafe to its final level. And then grade down into what is the area behind the players ring. And so there won't be any improvements on the seawall or anything in this stage. There won't be any work in the performance lawn or the seating bowl, and there won't be the final installation of the electrical throughout the park that was originally contemplated. That's the principal change between what we were talking about in the original Phase 1 and now. Any questions about that?
so just
We're not
one,
making a decision about mothballing in this Phase 1A.
No, we are.
Okay, because, yeah, that wasn't mentioned in.
Oh, I'm sorry, well, I'm just, yeah, we're moving Shaw to its final location,
Okay.
but we're not doing any work beyond it.
Sounds
But it
like it's
doesn't-
dying.
it doesn't preclude future decisions to change that decision. So by making this decision now, it doesn't mean that at a future time, you could decide, well, let's invest the money to come into code compliance and take care of it. One thing, the alternative to this approach is to say we hold off and wait until we have enough money to do the project in a more comprehensive manner. So that's kind of the, and really, it becomes a chicken and the egg in my mind. You start the project, you start the infrastructure work, and you show progress. That would, I think, lead to fundraising. That would lead to excitement to get things moving forward, versus waiting, but, which is becoming, but that, I just wanted to clarify that, that's the contrast to the options.
Other questions, Pat?
No, I will support it, but I will say that mothballing thing is a big deal.
Yeah.
It triggers a lot of things.
Yep.
For purpose of moving this project and this conversation forward, I'll support it, but I just think that is a very significant development.
We can start a campaign,
Yeah,
let's
you-
not mothball the
Yeah.
Shaw.
Any questions, or what's your feeling?
Well, yeah, my question is about the mothball thing, and you may have said this, and I apologize, I have trouble hearing sometimes, but when it's mothballed, when the building is mothballed, does that mean is there occupancy or not occupancy?
No,
It's
There
unoccupied.
is not.
Yeah.
So what happens to the Prescott Park offices and the other things that are currently in there now? That's my question, and you may have answered it, I apologize if I missed it.
Yeah, Peter addressed that. In essence, we'll have to work with the Arts Festival to relocate their offices and the functions they currently have in Shaw to another location, either off-site somewhere approximate to the park, or through additional trailers in the park? We'll have to do something to keep that function going.
And it's important to note that they're aware that that's the possibility, and they always knew they would have to move out of shots at one point anyway when we actually started working on it. This wouldn't be a surprise to them in case that was a concern in your decision.
The big benefit to this approach is that we maintain the performance lawn throughout the construction period, so that it does not disrupt them for a number of years.
So my other question then is that the timeline for the mothballing is until we collectively can raise the money to do the next step.
Absolutely right.
Correct.
Correct.
That could be a long
Thank
time.
Okay, so, I'm gonna have to, because Beth is leaving, make a question on whether the committee supports this approach and toward a recommendation to adopt this by the city council. I'll ask for public input afterwards, unfortunately, but because you're leaving, Beth. How do you feel?
I feel like we really don't have much of a choice, that this is the recommendation, and like you said, if we need to change it, we can't. Somebody steps forward with a bunch of money, we can move forward. So yes, I
Okay.
accept your proposal.
Yes.
Genevieve?
Yes.
Okay, and the chair votes yes.
All right, sorry, folks, gotta go.
I'm gonna open it up to comments by the
Beth.
Thanks,
public
Beth.
at this point.
Thank you.
If we hear something
Nice to see you.
really, that would cause us to change our mind, then I'll call another meeting next week or something, but why don't we, would you like to add anything, Peter?
I would, Mayor.
Please, why don't you go ahead and take Beth's chair. Identify yourself for the record, please.
Okay. Peter Huda, 280 South Street, a former member of this committee. In following this, I guess I would ask if, since the mothballing is such a big thing, I would ask if there is any possibility of limited utilization, and that maybe we could get some options on that. Like after you move the Shaw and you get all of the utilities in there, is it possible to let maybe the Arts Festival come back partly, or is there any other options besides just leaving it empty and mothballed? I mean, can we stage anything? That seems to be a concern for just about everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So is it possible to bring back some options to the committee?
Yeah, I can try to answer that. I think Peter answered a little bit already. So I think the answer would be, I think we would go into the idea that we are mothballing it, and then if it looked like it was gonna be a prolonged period of time before we could raise enough money to put the addition up, then we might look at doing something transitional. In making that decision, I think we're weighing spending money that would become a stranded cost. So for instance, if we put bathrooms in Shaw until the addition could be, those bathrooms would end up being a wasted expense because the ultimate plan wouldn't have them. I think it'd probably be difficult to be able to change the location of the building and get the permits necessary to allow use of the upper floors. Could there be something on the first floor that, would be just a storage thing? I think that would go to probably a function of the permitting and what these.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is gonna be, to what degree do we need to stabilize the building, really, when you move it? What goes into that will dictate it. And then, of course, the biggest difference is when you go from an unoccupied to an occupied building, it kind of triggers all the things that Peter and Joe were talking about, and so it starts to cascade very quickly into other set of requirements. But
I think the fire safety thing is they're adamant about that. There's no way of getting around a lot of that.
There are, I mean, it is a really good point, though, and I think it's something that we need to explore fully and understand what it means to, if we were to try to make it either occupy or non-occupied storage. So because, the life safety issues are less, there's still the concern relative to fire and things like that. But it's worth exploring further to get a better handle on, because, it is going to be frustrating to have a building relocated and not usable. So that is, we're knowing full well that's the case. you know, the hopes is that will help spur people to say, well, let's do something more and invest in the addition so that we can get this, you know, realize the vision. But we need to explore that further. But the hope here was, because of those timelines were so tight, that we needed to start we needed to get a consensus at least to move forward, so we could get the permitting process moving forward. And then the further discussions, as Cassie and team start to develop it, we can better refine it and better understand, what does it mean to mothball? Is it a partial mothball? Is there storage use? And, you know, these guys, I drive them crazy when I say, well, let's try this, let's try that. And they're like, yeah, well, there's physical limitations, there's engineering limitations and things, so.
Another piece of this that is also interesting, maybe along the lines, is when you mothball and you protect, right, the building, particularly the windows, right? You know, what does it look like? And those are things that we could advance options on that would be necessary, you know? It's presentation of what it looks like when it's in this current state, so that it looks potentially more admirable to look at than something that's just been shelved to some extent.
Well, I'm trying to visualize the timeline, and I'm thinking, okay, if you get permit A and in permit A, you're allowed to do this, maybe we have another option. By the time we get to permit B, all those during this timeline, maybe there's something else we could be kind of adding in there. And I have no idea about, you know, what it involves, but I just wanted to get an idea about if there is any options that we could explore, because, like, I mean, it's going to be all about the PR on this, to get folks looking at this and not, like Peter said, you know, the stuff in the ground isn't pretty and it's not exciting, but
Capture the imagination.
right.
Yeah.
So just something to say, yeah, it's coming. We're working on it, and you know, that kind of stuff. The only other thing I would say, I think it's exciting that you're thinking about outside fundraising, and hopefully we can do small things. You know, like they did on the memorial, maybe bricks or slats on the walk or something that doesn't have to be a giant contribution, but you could get your name on there. There's a lot of things that we could do.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in fundraising, but I think it's important to allow the entire community to have, even if it's a small amount, to have something in the pot, so to speak.
Yeah, and it could be exciting. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody on Zoom who wants to comment? Courtney?
Hi all, thank you so much for asking for my input. I appreciate being included in the conversations. I sort of share what I'm assuming is some disappointment at the committee level, and as I've expressed to Tom and Peter and Joe, the festival is committed to helping to make this happen, and we are fundraising experts, so happy to help join you in partnership to do anything we can to make the park the sort of best place that it can be. So thank you for considering us. I think, you know, I've sort of stressed this in the past, but it's worth saying again in this meeting that it's essential for us to be in the park for the planning and execution of the work that we do. So, you know, I appreciate you keeping that in mind and working with us to find an alternative home from the Shaw Building while it's mothballed.
Right. And for the record, that was Courtney Perkins of Prescott Park.
Oh, sorry, yes, and I am in the Shaw Building currently.
Okay. Any other, I don't see any other comments or anybody from the public who might be able to comment, so I'll open up to any other new business or final questions or discussions. Or.
So I would just suggest we present to council so they, you know, unfortunately, the assistant mayor had conflict schedule, but I think it'd be a good opportunity probably to bring this to council and to get their buy-in relative to the idea of the addition, so that we can start that process to start putting together some concepts and to, you know, explain to the public that it's going to be a reduced scope, and that there's an understanding and just a kind of a report back almost. So,
Absolutely. Should we do a written proposal, or what do you think we should just present this with an outline similar to what we've done
I,
in the past?
I think it probably, what was presented today, maybe with slight modification, would be appropriate. And depending upon the council's schedule, a short presentation with the, with a ask, with a clear definition of, recommended vote from that, which would be to accept the recommendation to continue on this effort in this manner. So,
Okay. All right, maybe we can work on that with you, Cassie. So they're not meeting this coming Monday, they meet
the 20th, I think, or 21st is the next meeting, so it's a week
Yeah,
from
yeah.
last Monday.
Okay. All right, other questions or comments? All right.
I have one question, and I don't want to extend this meeting, but at some day, I would love to understand more about the 5 parcels you mentioned and the permitting process. I know everyone's laughing, but I'm just curious if that coincides with the phases that we had originally talked about, or if that's, I'd just like to know more about it so I can understand it, but you don't have to spend time here unless you can do it in one quick sentence.
Well, I'll attempt to do it in a quick 2 sentences, but, so the parcels that make up Prescott Park were acquired at different times.
Right.
And some of them have different restrictions than others in the deeds.
Okay.
So, for instance, if you look at the history of the park, the area where the Players Ring is and the lawn behind it was owned privately for most of the history of Prescott Park. It was like a severed park, and that was acquired, I think, in the late 80s or something.
Okay.
And it's not subject to the same terms that the early parcels were, that the Prescott sisters had restrictions on use and things of that nature. So that's really part of the history. It isn't so much, what the state, in fact, as far as I know, the state doesn't put any conditions on the use of these parcels. It's the ones that, the restrictions that were imposed at the time they were acquired by the city.
In the deeds, okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Hearing none, I'll call for a motion to adjourn, and since it's like you and I are the only people left, would you like to
Oh, that we adjourn.
Okay. All right, I'll declare the motion adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Okay.
It's hard to do all of that while you're
Written for you is
presenting.
just sort of a one-page point summary of what we're
One more
Is
thing,
think you'd
um,
object.
Yeah, I will,
That the
definitely
city
not, that takes a
council
lot of
can
my
say,
time.
okay, we approve
I
that.
don't.
I wonder,
Yeah.
and I like the fact that we have it all here, don't we? And it's,